The tray slipped from her trembling hands, silverware clattering against the polished floor just as the chandelier lights above seemed to flare brighter, exposing her in the center of the most expensive restaurant in the city. Every head turned. Every breath seemed to stop. What no one saw was that the shy waitress wasn't clumsy at all. She was signing desperately to an elderly woman at the corner table, her hands moving with quiet urgency, her eyes filled with something deeper than fear. And when the billionaire's son realized what those signs meant, the entire room would never be the same again. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that change lives forever, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Her name was Elena Morales, and invisibility had become her armor. At 24, she had learned how to move through life without being noticed, how to lower her gaze, soften her presence, and apologize with her posture before anyone could accuse her of taking up too much space. The restaurant where she worked was a cathedral of wealth, all marble floors and hushed voices, a place where power sat comfortably in tailored suits and silk dresses. Elena did not belong there, not really. She wore the uniform, memorized the menu, and smiled when required, but inside she carried a different world, one shaped by silence, struggle, and a promise she had made long ago. She had grown up with a deaf father in a cramped apartment where the walls were thin and the bills were thick. Sign language had been her first language, her father's hands teaching her words long before her mouth could shape them. When he died suddenly during her last year of high school, the world grew unbearably loud and cruel at the same time. Elena learned quickly that kindness was not guaranteed, and that survival often required shrinking yourself small enough to avoid attention. College became impossible. Dreams were postponed indefinitely. The restaurant job was not a stepping stone, it was a lifeline. That evening, the reservation list had been whispered about all day. The Caldwell family, a name spoken with reverence and caution. Thomas Caldwell, the billionaire tech magnate whose companies powered half the devices in the room, was dining with his mother, Margaret Caldwell, a woman rarely seen in public since a stroke years earlier had left her deaf and fragile. The staff had been warned to be flawless, no mistakes, no disruptions. Elena had been assigned to the section reluctantly, her manager's eyes lingering with doubt. She nodded anyway because she always did. From the moment Elena approached the table, something felt different. Margaret Caldwell sat stiffly, her hands folded, her eyes wandering with a distant confusion that Elena recognized instantly. It was the look of someone surrounded by sound they could not hear, dependent on lip movements that were too fast, too careless. Thomas spoke animatedly, unaware that his mother was nodding along without understanding. A familiar ache settled in Elena's chest. She had seen this her whole life. She had lived it. The moment that changed everything came quietly. Margaret's water glass was empty, her gaze flicking nervously between her son and the moving mouths around her. Elena reached the table, set the glass down, and without thinking, her hands lifted. The signs came naturally, fluid and gentle, asking if she was comfortable, if she needed anything, if the lights were too bright. Margaret's eyes widened in shock, then softened with something that looked like relief and recognition. Her hands trembled as she signed back, slow but grateful. "Thank you. I can understand you." That was when the tray slipped, not from clumsiness but from the sudden weight of being seen. The sound echoed, drawing every gaze. Thomas Caldwell froze, his eyes darting. From the fallen silverware to his mother's animated hands. Then to Elena's pale face. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to something deeper, something raw. He had never seen his mother communicate so freely since her stroke. He had never realized how alone she had been sitting beside him all these years. The restaurant manager rushed forward, apology already forming, ready to scold Elena, to remove her from the floor. But Thomas raised a hand, stopping everything. Silence fell heavier than the chandeliers above. Elena felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising, the instinct to apologize, to disappear. Instead, she kept signing, gently explaining to Margaret what had happened, reassuring her. Margaret smiled for the first time that evening, reaching out and touching Elena's wrist, grounding her. Thomas watched this exchange like a man witnessing a miracle too late. Guilt washed over him as memories surfaced, moments when his mother had smiled politely while understanding nothing, moments he had mistaken compliance for contentment. He realized then that his wealth, his power, his endless resources had failed at something heartbreakingly simple: communication. The rest of the evening unfolded differently than anyone expected. Elena remained at the table, not as a waitress hovering in the background, but as a bridge. She signed menus, described dishes, translated warmth and humor that had been missing for years. Margaret laughed silently, her shoulders shaking, tears slipping down her cheeks as she shared stories with her hands that had been locked inside her for too long. Other diners watched, forks paused mid-air, sensing something sacred unfolding among the clink of crystal glasses. Elena's fear slowly loosened its grip. For the first time since her father's death, her skill, the language that had once marked her as different, became a gift rather than a burden. She remembered nights practicing signs by dim light, wondering if it would ever matter again. Tonight, it mattered more than anything. Thomas felt his carefully constructed world crack open. He saw not just a shy waitress but a young woman carrying resilience in every quiet movement. He thought of his mother's isolation, of the charities he funded that never touched this simple human need. Tears blurred his vision as he realized that the most valuable thing in the room was not his watch, his suit, or the building itself, but the connection Elena had restored with a few movements of her hands. When the meal ended, the restaurant did not return to normal. Something lingered in the air, a shared understanding that they had witnessed a moment that could not be replicated. The manager approached cautiously, bracing for reprimand. Instead, Thomas thanked Elena, his voice unsteady, his composure finally breaking. He held his mother's hands, watching as she signed something slowly, deliberately. "You are not alone anymore." Elena went home that night with sore feet and a heart too full to sleep. She replayed the evening over and over, afraid it might dissolve like a dream. The next day, she was summoned to the office. Fear returned, sharp and familiar. She expected termination. Instead, she found Thomas Caldwell waiting. What followed was not a fairy tale rescue but something quieter and more profound. Thomas asked Elena about her life, her father, her fluency in sign language. He listened in a way few ever had, not rushing, not assuming. He explained his mother's struggle, his own blindness to it, and the gratitude he could not fully express. He offered her a new role, not as charity, but as necessity, a personal aide and interpreter for Margaret Caldwell, with training opportunities, education support, and a salary that made Elena's hands shake more than any Trey ever had. Accepting meant stepping into visibility, into a world where shrinking was no longer an option. Elena wrestled with doubt, with the fear of not being enough, of losing the safety of anonymity. But she thought of her father, of the promise she had made to never let silence become loneliness if she could help it. She said yes. Months passed, and change came in waves. Margaret's health improved, her laughter returned, her posture straightened. Elena attended classes funded by the Caldwell Foundation, studying linguistics and accessibility advocacy. She still wore her humility like a second skin, but confidence began to bloom where fear once lived. Thomas changed too, his empire expanding in a new direction, funding communication access programs, ensuring no one else sat nodding in confusion while pretending to understand. The restaurant where it all began placed a small plaque near the corner table, not naming names, just a simple inscription about kindness and connection. Elena visited once, sitting quietly, hands resting in her lap, remembering the girl who had dropped a tray and found her purpose in the same moment. As this story comes close to its end, take a second to comment below. Tell us where you're watching from or share a moment when kindness changed your life. Your words might inspire someone who needs it today. On a spring afternoon years later, Elena stood on a stage, addressing an audience without speaking, her hands moving with confidence and grace as interpreters voiced her message. In the front row sat Margaret Caldwell, eyes shining with pride, and beside her, Thomas, no longer just a billionaire, but a son who had learned how to truly listen. Elena spoke of invisible people, of overlooked skills, of the power hidden in quiet corners of the world. She spoke of how one moment of compassion could reroute a life. If this story touched your heart, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel seen, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in humanity, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps these stories reach hearts that need them most, because sometimes the loudest miracles happen without sound at all.